Welcome to today's webinar, Three Ways Tech Can Improve Active Community Policing, presented by Nuance. I'm David Griffith, Editor of Police, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry. You will be contacted by email with a response after the event. Our presenter today is Richard Stanley, who is the former police chief of the North Andover, Massachusetts Police Department. Retired Chief Stanley is president of RMS Associates, a consulting firm that partners with the law enforcement community to deliver private sector solutions that solve the challenges faced by police agencies. Chief Stanley has 38 years of law enforcement experience, 30 years of which he served as the chief of police for North Andover and Wareham, Massachusetts. He served as president of the Massachusetts Chief of Police Association in 1996, president of the Northeastern Massachusetts Law Enforcement Council from 1991 to 1992, and member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police Homeland Security Committee from 2001 to 2011. Now I'm going to turn this over to Eric Lascola, Manager of Solutions Marketing for Nuance.
Hey, thanks, David. Just a quick check. I want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. David, am I coming through loud and clear?
Yes.
Great, excellent. So thank you, everyone, and thanks to Police Magazine for hosting us this afternoon. And definitely want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us this afternoon. What I'd like to do is kind of jump right in today to our agenda and walk you through it. But before I do, just a quick housekeeping item. Throughout the presentation, we will be collecting questions, and I encourage you all to use the chat function in the webinar software to ask those questions, and we will be collecting them and actually, taking them at the end of the webinar session. So thank you. Feel free throughout the webinar to use the chat function, and we will collect and prioritize them in the order received. So with that, let's jump into our agenda for today. So 3 ways tech can improve community policing. I'd like to begin by formally welcoming Chief Stanley. You've already heard the introduction for him, so we'll get to Chief Stanley in a moment. We will speak to the impacts of paperwork on community policing, and we'll discover really that there's significant impacts to it, the more time being spent on administration. I'll touch briefly, some of you on the phone may be aware of the annual survey that Nuance conducts every year just ahead of IACP, the role of technology in law enforcement paperwork. We'll get right into then the 3 multipliers that police tech helps to mitigate as it relates to the impact of paperwork on community policing. How speech recognition is one of the technologies that help support those multipliers. And then we'll get into some expert commentary from Chief Stanley based on his 38-year career in policing, and then finally the Q&A session. So let me move to the next slide. David did a great job already of introducing Chief Stanley and his background. I won't read this slide to you. What I would like to say is, I have got to know Chief Stanley, and Nuance has in his capacity as president of RMS Associates. And really, it's been the last little over 3 years since we've been working together. And as many of you know, Nuance entered the law enforcement space in a big way about 3.5 years ago. And Chief Stanley was really very instrumental and critical for us to make the introduction of our technology into the law enforcement community and make sure that we got it right. And based on the success we've had as an organization, we've been very grateful for his input. So let's jump right in. And what I'd like to do before we begin is kind of set the table a little bit as it relates to the problem of administration, and particularly the growing demands on law enforcement as it relates to the paperwork that they're doing today and the very real impacts that it's having on the time that's spent in the community. So, Chief Stanley, are you there?
I am.
Great. Let's jump right in, and perhaps you can speak to our slide here on the impacts and some of the things that we've discussed and that we're hearing as we speak to the law enforcement community.
Fine. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to work with the people who are really behind the scenes driving so many changes in law enforcement at Nuance. One thing I wanted to point out is a good administrator doesn't want to overburden or hamper a police officer's efforts, but solid documentation is so important. The problem is that so much time is allocated to report preparation, there's no time left for one of our key roles, which is positive community engagement. This is what we signed up for, not to be clerks. We can't choose both the critical needs of the agency. There is no choice. We need solid reporting, but we also need to have positive community engagement. Speech recognition can dramatically cut back on time allocated for reports, resulting in faster, better quality reports with more detail prepared safely on the street. Heads up, on a swivel, in your car, creating omnipresence. And we'll go into a lot of these details, but again, it's good to be with you. When we look at this first slide, a couple of things really stand out to me. Expanded federal mandates. I want you all to think about the changes that are taking place with NIBRs and the detail required. And it can be intense, and it can be overburdening sometimes. Plus, citizens and other law enforcement agencies need your reports immediately. The heat is on us. Heightened paperwork, the demands siphon off our time from active police work, limiting community visibility. Does that sound familiar? Directed patrol, calls for service, shifts running short, yet at the same time, administration is pushing positive community engagement. And there's no time. So where does that all come from? Where does the time come from? That's what we have to get up to, is finding a way to find more time for the officers in the street. It's not all about sitting in a car, typing in a car. We see it that when we see it, typing in the car, we see it from our perspective of safety, where we're not aware of our surroundings. But the public looks at us in the car with their heads down, and what do they see? They're starting to question, not all the public, but some of the public. Is the officer sleeping? Is he surfing the net? But we know better. It's about officer safety. Eric,
Thanks,
next slide.
Chief. Sure, great. And I think, Rachel, at this time, what I'd like to do as it relates to the amount of time that's being spent, we like to do this in the webinars at this point, is let's pull up our first poll question, if we could. And so the question is, approximately how many hours per day do you or your officers spend completing incident reports or other police paperwork? So I'd like to open this up to the audience. We'll give it about 20 seconds or so for everyone to respond. Great, Rachel. I think we're pretty much leveled out. Let's push these results to the audience, if we can. Or I can press the button here. Excellent. So what we found here, actually, this is very consistent with what we see when we go out and do our reporting in our surveys, I should say, of the law enforcement community. So 38% of you indicate that you're spending 3 to 4 hours or more per day on reporting, and about another 17% are actually spending 4 or more hours a week. And that's actually very consistent. I'm going to jump back here, if we can go back to our slides. That's very consistent with the report that we produce annually. So this is the 2019 Role of Technology in Law Enforcement report. And again, we submit this right ahead of IACP. It's administered to over 12,000 law enforcement professionals, roughly half, about 45% of police chiefs, and the balance are IT administrators, command staff, and records personnel. So what we're looking for is to really see how that changes over time, the amount of time that officers are spending on reporting, as well as, frankly, even the emergence of new technologies, things like consumer technology that is bleeding into people's professional lives. So let's do this. Let's jump to our next slide here. And Chief Stanley, if you can speak to some of the findings just at a high level, and then we'll jump right into the multipliers that we have of how police tech can help community policing. So, Chief Stanley.
I will. When I look at this, and I was actually very surprised, because I used to always think that it was me feeling some of this pressure and talking to the officers who I was responsible for and work with on a daily basis when I'd hear them. But what stands out to me when I look at this is a couple of things. 91% of your peers say heavy reporting demands means less time on the street. I saw that as a chief, but I really didn't see it enough. I didn't realize how important that was. And I know one thing, when I talked to a lot of the police officers I worked with, they all said to me, hey, I didn't sign up to be a clerk. I signed up to be out there and making a difference. So that one really shocked me, the 91%. 81% paperwork creates burnout, they feel. 81% of them. And we wonder why, with recruitment, that we're having problems. It's no wonder. I think the frustration that is out there among our current officers, it probably bleeds out. We probably end up talking to a lot of new recruits, and they talk to them about what takes place on a daily basis, what their days are like. When we have college interns, they see how much time is actually spent working on reports. So what does it lead to? It's not just creating burnout. It's leading to low morale. It's leading to incomplete reports. And it causes frustration up and down the chain of command, as well as with everything from the court systems to attorneys to insurance companies and all these other people who get copies of our reports. So it's not just burnout. There are a lot of other effects that take place. And the last one that really gets me, and I feel as though it's the most important, is that it impacts officer safety. Concentrating on typing in the car makes us vulnerable. We can't stress that enough. It concerns me to no end. When I see cops sitting somewhere on the side of the road typing in a car and their head down, it bothers me because I know they're not aware of their surroundings. Next slide.
Great. So, Chief, now that we've set the table and kind of identified the problem, let's jump right into the multipliers themselves. And the first is combating manual documentation processes. So I'll let you speak to that and some of the negative impacts that manual reporting does have.
Yeah, Eric, that's a good point. It's funny, when I talk to a lot of, I remember back when I was working and I'd listen to a police officer tell me what happened at the scene. And I've talked to a lot of my peers where we hear these stories in an officer's own voice talking to us about what took place, what the incident was all about, how they responded, and they have it down cold. So we've all heard that, filled with detail and color. You tell the supervisor and it's clear. But it comes time for court, a criminal trial, a lawsuit, or whatever agency you're testifying in front of, and what do you end up with? You end up with the Cliff Note version. You end up with a report that may have been typed 3 days later after an incident. Maybe it's one of type 5 or 6 typed reports that you're catching up on. It's 3 o'clock in the morning when things finally slow down. Maybe you're on a double. You finally have the opportunity to catch up on your reports. Your head is bobbing off the keyboard. You can feel your head bouncing up and down when you're doing the reports. I'm sure those listening have all been there. 3 black coffees and a Red Bull, that doesn't do it. Your report's beat up, you're beat up, and your case is beat up. Again, being a clerk is not what we signed on for. We have to get our officers back on the street. Stay out of the station. We're cops. We're supposed to be proactive. We don't hang around at the station. And it almost goes back to the old saying, I have to laugh sometimes, but when you always hear people say, where are the cops when you need them? The reality is they're in the station doing reports. Next slide.
Yep. And so let's talk, Chief. We've talked about how it is that technology, if properly implemented, how it can really become invisible, as it were, and really become an extension of the officer. So, any comments there based on your experience with the use of technology over time and how it can help, in particular, with being more visible, more omnipresent in the community?
Yeah, Eric, and I have to, when I look at this, you have to think back of, I like to call them the good old days where personal recollection was okay in court, where you could get up there and freewheel it. Today, it's a lot different. The pressure on police officers today is extremely tough. Personal recollection doesn't cut it anymore. But the power of technology and the changes is something that we can use to our advantage. It always brings back something that I remember, and we all remember our academy days, but it was drilled into my head back in 1977. If it's not in the report, it didn't happen. It's as clear as that. In my career, whether it be criminal cases, lawsuits, political issues with city council or elected officials, labor cases, or even the press, the written word is the most powerful. The power of a report, the power of your voice enhances that. It's telling a story. The day of the keyboard is gone. Back to the basics, your voice, your recollection. No more weak reports. It's all about documentation, documentation, documentation.
Great, Chief. Thank you. And I think, what I'd like to do at this point is let's move to our next slide here. And Rachel, if you could pull up the video that we have to show everyone on the phone today. This is a great example of speech recognition and how it can really slip into the background, if you will. So let's see if we can play that video now.
Thanks for coming in today. This shouldn't take too much of your time.
Sure. Happy to help.
Let's get started. Can you state your name for the record?
My name is Matthew Morgan.
And for the record, are you speaking to me voluntarily?
Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. A few days ago, around 8 o'clock, there was an armed robbery at a liquor store. Detective Brady has talked to you about this, right?
Yeah, he has.
We're looking into that robbery, as you know. So I'm going to ask you a few questions to gather information, all right?
Yeah, that's okay.
What kind of car do you have?
I have a Ford Taurus, but it went missing a few days ago.
When exactly?
After work, 4 days ago.
Is there a reason we would find a bat in there?
A bat?
Yeah, like an aluminum baseball bat.
Yeah, I do. I keep that in there.
Okay, so that's yours.
Yeah, that's mine.
I'm going to check on some of the things we talked about. After that, I'm probably going to have some more questions for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's all right.
Great, Rachel. Thank you. Let me just pause here for a second, and I hope everyone was able to listen to the audio of that as well. This is a great example of something that Chief Stanley was talking about, and many of you on the phone here may have actually seen this exhibit at IACP in Chicago. And it's just another example of how it is that technology can serve the community. So obviously in the scenario, you saw an interview room, and the idea that you have a suspect and obviously a detective, and the ability now to actually have that conversation, that dialogue take place, and have a transcript actually being generated live. And as it said in the video, imagine doing keyword searches on a very lengthy type of interview. This is the type of thing that aids the community. And historically, as we know, and certainly Chief Stanley has told us, oftentimes due to the expense and time and energy involved, typically it was high-profile cases only that would really warrant having a manual human transcriptionist go in and listen to an audio recording and transcribe it. And we're really looking at today. Now, this is not a product that is available today, but it's not very far away at all. And it's a great example of this idea, again, of technology slipping into the background and being available only when it is needed. And in fact, we're actually doing research today, and Chief Stanley has been instrumental in helping us with this to optimize an experience for what this might look like in the near future for law enforcement. So we thought it was a great proof point to kind of illustrate how it is the technology can help the community and help solve more crimes in less time and help move criminal proceedings along with the relationship with prosecutors and the DA. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide here. So let's jump into the second multiplier, which is really the idea of releasing time back to agencies so that they can be engaged with their community. And instead of filling out paperwork and being back at the station, as Chief Stanley said, being able to be omnipresent, being able to engage with community leaders and faith-based organizations. So, Chief Stanley, I'm going to, again, turn it over to you and talk a little bit about positive community engagement and how officers can be empowered to, build that trust, build that respect within the community.
Thanks, Eric. So again, we want to empower officers, protect and serve while building respect and trust. What does that all really mean? Well, we all want positive community engagement, all ranks, from the chief's office down to patrol officers. Our elected officials want it. And the community we serve want it as well. But we need to be given the time to engage in that positive community engagement. We don't have the time. Officers in the street need some downtime. If we give our officers the time, the public a lot of time is surprised. Even administrators are surprised with what can be accomplished. Where do we see that today more than anywhere is on social media. Without management direction, it's the cops stopping and playing basketball with some kids. It's the cops stopping and buying lemonade at the stand. We see it all the time on social media. It humanizes police officers. Cops are generally good people who took the job because they want to help. What do we want? We want time to be proactive, not reactive. We want time to build relationships with the community. We want time to show the community who we are, that we are good people. And we want time to build mutual respect and understanding. With those relationships in place, it's money in the bank. When bad things happen, and they will, we all know each other, we can talk. We're not meeting with the community members for the first time under difficult circumstances. We already have a relationship. That relationship goes a long way during difficult times. We've all been there. When we walk in cold and don't know who we're dealing with, it makes it very difficult in a tough situation. If they know us and we know them, our customers, those are the people we work for and with to make the community a better place. This type of activity, automation done on the street, will give us the time we need to make a difference in how we are viewed to the public.
Hey, Chief, if I could just interject just for a moment. I know in our conversations, one of the things that you had mentioned to me is, particularly today with the 24/7 news cycle, that, it's one of the bullet points that we have on the slide is this idea of smart tools today being made available because of an increasing demand from the public to have access to records and whether that's victims that are looking for that. Could you maybe expand on it? Because that was new to me, and I think it'd be worthwhile pointing out to our audience.
Yeah, I think that was probably the discussion we had about how quickly we are sending reports to the court, sending reports electronically to the insurance company, sending reports electronically to probation, parole, victim services, and so forth. When that can all be done quickly and be approved and sent out, it makes us look much better. And it also, remember, it helps in the victims as far as where they are, that they're not waiting and they don't have that frustration, that their voices are being heard and we're getting the information they need immediately to those people who need it.
Great. Thank you. What I'd like to do is turn to the next slide here, and Chief Stanley, I'll let you speak to this, but this was a recent article that really speaks to the idea of technology being used to increase community engagement. And this was Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, and you can all see in the audience the link to this. But basically it's speaking about the idea of making officers more productive and the ability to, instead of just putting more officers on the street, making the officers you have more productive. So any thoughts on that, Chief Stanley, that maybe you expound on a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd like to point, I'll tell you, you talk about forward thinking, not just being told, no, you can't have more cops, as a lot of elected officials may in fact say at times, and when we argue we need more cops, but instead, the mayor here was in fact looking at it through a fiduciary responsibility. And I love his quote. Some people say we need 12,000 officers. I say, what would you rather have, 12,000 officers or 10,000 officers with 20% more time on the street? To me, it's a no-brainer. Well, that's perfect because, to a cop also, it's a no-brainer. He would rather have more time. He or she would rather have more time to be out there on the street rather than being bogged down from the whole 8 hours with doing nothing but paperwork. It's a win-win for the cops, for the budget, and ultimately the taxpayer. Cops are happier, less paperwork burden. It's a morale booster. Get the police officers back on the street again, working with the citizens, solving problems, positive community engagement. We all need to work smarter. The funds are not going to be available for more staff. We must give them the proper tools. Those of us who are on this call, who are administrators, have to realize also that we have that responsibility to take care of the people we work with. As administrators, get them the best training, the best equipment that's possibly out there. It's a good business decision. Police officers become more visible in the community solving problems, less costs, more efficient workforce, safer environment for the officer, safer for the community because the added benefit is omnipresence. By doing the reports on the street, the cops are back on the street in a mobile office, and they're working in just their mere presence, being out there, is stopping crime.
Great. Thanks, Chief. And I think that really leads here to our final multiplier, if you will, and how police technology enables community engagement. And it's this idea that you talked about, and I know we've talked about in prior conversations about keeping communities safe by elevating, officer safety and also their situational awareness. So, I'll jump to the next slide here, but there are really three things that I know are themes that have come up in our conversation: distracted driving, the risk of ambush and reputational risk as well. So I thought, obviously let you speak to those in more detail for our audience.
I will. And again, to reiterate, officer safety has always been and will continue to be my number one focus. In fact, that's one of the reasons I'm doing work with you, Eric, right now on this project. As an administrator of a police department, or in fact as a regional SWAT team, my responsibility is to provide the best equipment and training to the team. That's what I am supposed to do. And that is something I take very seriously. It should be a priority no matter what rank. One thing that always bothers me is when I consistently, and all of you on the call get these, and it tears at my heart, is when I get that email alert, officer down news alert. It's constant. And you see the faces of the police officers who have been killed for multiple reasons. But we have to look at it further. It's not just the officers, it's his or her family, destroyed, spouse, parents, children. But it seems like, I know with me, when I look at these situations, I always come up with, and I know you all must do the same thing, yeah, but what if? What if they had their head in a swivel at that moment? What if there was a second car responding? What if they were in fact distracted driving? They're all out there trying to do the right thing, and we've lost so many men and women in this profession when we may have been in a position we could have saved somebody by giving them other opportunities. How many actually die with distracted driving do we know? Because they are multitasking. They're on their terminals. They may take their eye off the road for just 1 second. They may be getting that quick text from one of the other officers about something going on, but trying to, again, look down at their terminal. There's an awful lot of technology in the car, and if it's not managed properly, it can be dangerous. We've all been there. Distracted driving cuts both ways. What if we caused the accident? What about the lawsuits, the department reputation, bad press? And most importantly, each and one of us who are sworn to protect the public, and we take that so seriously, it's our own feelings of guilt. We've all been in a position also, and when I look at this slide about ambush, I want you to all think about that night you were sitting in your cruiser. Maybe you were texting on your phone. Maybe you were working on a report in the car, and you were typing away when all of a sudden there was a knock on your window. You never even saw the person walk up to the car. That knock on the window stands the hair on the back of your neck up straight. Well, you know what? Some people, it isn't a knock on the window. Some officers sitting there get assaulted. Some officers, like the officers in New York City, were both shot and killed while they were sitting in their car. These things happen. We need to have our heads in a swivel. That knock on the window may not be for directions. It may not be just to inform you that there was an accident down the street. Not being situationally aware because you're typing a report is not an option because it takes you out of the zone.
Great. Thanks, Chief Stanley. And I think kind of there's a proof point to what you just said. I'd like to pause here for a moment and let everyone read this quote from Terry Cunningham, who I know, Chief, is a professional colleague of yours. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and then ask you to make some commentary on this. So again, I'd encourage everyone to reflect on this for a bit. And Chief, again, Terry Cunningham is a professional colleague of yours. Would you like to add any more color around this? It obviously backs up what you were just saying a moment ago. But clearly it gets down to the idea of implementing technology and doing it well so that it is an asset and not a potential liability.
I would, Eric, and it's funny. So Terry Cunningham, as the slide says, was the chief of police in Wellesley. Is also IACP president. Wellesley, Mass, is located probably 15 miles from Nuance headquarters in Burlington, Massachusetts. And today, Terry is, in fact, the deputy director, number 2 at IACP. And when we first started this project, Terry was involved. Wellesley Police Department was involved, along with about 15 other police departments in Northeast Massachusetts of all sizes, city departments and small town departments. And basically what we did was we took this whole product and we created it bottoms up. We took it from the perspective of the police officer in the street. What were the problems that the men and women of law enforcement were facing when they were on the street? What could we do as managers to make them safer and more effective? And again, from our perspective, also looking at budget issues and so forth to get the most bang for our buck. But again, the safety issue came first. And so Terry was involved from day one in this whole project, and I think you see the fruits of an awful lot of people's efforts today with voice technology in the cars.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Let me move it along here a little bit. I actually want to make sure we save some time here for Q&A at the end. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I think many people know that Nuance, of course, is involved in delivering speech recognition technology to the law enforcement community. But basically, this touches on some of the things that we've talked about. We allow people, the technology allows people, officers to spend more time in the community. It helps them stay situationally aware and create, those vital, complete, and timely incident reports. And I thought, Chief, I know we spoke about this just before the, a couple of weeks before the webinar, given, the situation today and what we're going through with COVID-19. Maybe briefly you could speak to this and we can, move a little closer to the Q&A.
Yeah, it's funny. Whoever saw this coming? Safety in era of pandemics. Did you ever think we'd be in this kind of a situation? Virtual roll calls? Instead of staying at home orders, now it's stay in your car order. Don't even make motor vehicle stops. Officer safety now, as compared to then, we used to talk about active shooters, less than lethal, communications, de-escalate situations, in body armor. What is it today? Social distancing, Lysol, hand sanitizer. Body armor, is it really more important than an N95 mask, gloves, hand sanitizer? How did this all happen? Well, it's funny when you look at it, you have to say that what we're doing today, keeping the officers in the cars instead of going back and forth to the station, it's all about risk reduction. Stay in your car, getting rid of the keyboard. The keyboard with voice recognition is a thing of the past. It's all in a power mic. It's true that, in fact, we can have a mobile office, and it's similar to working at home, like a lot of people do.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Then maybe, I'd like to just kind of, we're nearing our end here, have you kind of give us a view, if you will, and the idea of a lot of audience members here have been through technology implementation. So just briefly, can you give us a sense of, what are the fundamentals and how to get a technology implementation done correctly? That'd be great.
Well, I think over the last 38 years, I've seen an awful lot of changes, going from the 3x5 cards, and it's crazy where things have gone. And I have to wonder, how far can technology go? I thought the benefit of dragging law enforcement was, in fact, the pinnacle, and now the product management team and engineers have come up with the interview room of the future. I don't know where the end will be, but I know one thing. As managers, again, I keep stressing, we cannot lose sight of the street officers. What are they up against? We push policy. How does it affect them? Efficiency plus an enjoyable career and working environment can be accomplished. Technology will fail if it does not work towards the mission and goals of the agency. Is the workflow enhanced? You really have to ask that question. Have you made available more time on the street for omnipresence? Have we freed up officers' time for positive community engagement? Have we provided an environment of buy-in by the troops for successful implementation? You can't have technology just simply for having technology. It's just not a shiny object you can buy that looks good. They have to have buy-in. And when people don't have buy-in, it's not going to be successful.
Yeah, and I know, Chief, that's something that, one of the first things you always told us, right? You've seen a lot of times, whether it's pet projects or people that have been enamored with a shiny object, those implementations can fail. And it's really about ensuring the technology serves the mission of the organization and not people supporting the technology. So I think that's a great summation, and thank you. Rachel, what I'd like to do, because we're running short on time, I'd like to take one more survey question, if we could go to the second poll question, and I'll read this here to everyone. Which of the following, actually, you know what, if we could just go to the third question. I'd like to do that if we could, Rachel. Thank you. So we're very interested in all of your feedback, and the question here is, after reviewing the clip of the Interview Room of the Future video, do you believe this technology might rank as potentially equal to or higher priority compared to other significant technology investments that your department has been engaged with? And I gave example here of a body-worn camera. So let's open that up, and we'll get the questions right after this. Give it another 15 seconds or so. Okay, Rachel, I'm going to send the results here. It looks like we're pretty much leveled off. Give it one more second. All right, I'm going to send the results to the audience. So this is very interesting, and candidly, this is the feedback that we've been getting. I thank you all for providing it. So more than a third of you have said that you think that it would be. And that's consistent, again, with what we've heard. A sizable percentage, still somewhat on the fence. 43% is saying, maybe tell me a little bit more. And we're looking forward to doing that, which of course is why we exhibited this at IACP. And 18%, so less than 20% here are saying not necessarily, and that's good feedback as well. So thank you, all of you, for answering that survey question for us. So with that, let's jump back here and jump right into Q&A questions. And I know we've seen the chat window lighting up. David, is there any questions we can take that we can answer for our audience?
Yes. The first question is for Chief Stanley. In your experience, Chief Stanley, what is the most common pitfall agencies make when they evaluate implementing a new technology for their departments?
Well, thank you. One of the things I've seen through my experience has been this, and again, I just hit on it. It's do not buy technology for technology's sake. It must be for safety of our officers, workflow, and how will the technology improve those areas. We can't work for technology. Technology must work for us. we need vendors also, an awful lot of times, vendors who will support it easily, not leaving it up to our staff and tying up staff, because that defeats the purpose. One area where I see a lot of places having a problem is that all too often the police department and the police officers may want a certain technology, but IT directors, whether they be inside the agency or outside, city IT directors, they're very cautious about any technology being brought in for multiple reasons. Some of the reasons are they want to make sure that the technology sits on top of other things. It does not become part of, doesn't have access of other information. It has to be a technology that will not interfere with other technologies that are already in place. The integration has to work. There has to be a technology that works with all of your other technologies you have in the organization. If it's something that interferes with some of those other products you have, it's a problem. So the implementation can only be successful if you get buy-in from the staff, and that includes your IT crew, even if they are, in fact, not part of the department.
Great.
Okay,
Please, David, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here's a question for, I believe for you, Eric. The Interview Room of the Future video is really cool. How would our agency get this? Is it for sale? And if not, how far away is it?
Yeah, so you probably heard me use the term vision, and indeed it is. What I would tell you is we did exhibit this at IACP in Chicago. It is not yet a product today, but it is something that we have a lot of expertise in. And in fact, some of you may know that Nuance is heavily engaged in the healthcare community. And we actually have a live product today on that, and I'd encourage you to Google DAX in Nuance if you like, and you can see an example of this type of technology in an interaction between a patient and a doctor instead of an investigator and a suspect. We do not have a definitive timeline at this point, David, but it's clearly something when we go to trade shows and we speak to the law enforcement community, we get asked this question multiple times. When are you going to have this technology? And what I can tell you is it's moving closer to a reality for law enforcement. We would look forward to partnering with agencies to help provide us with, frankly, voice data, which helps us train the artificial intelligence engines. And stay tuned for IACP in 2020 in Louisiana. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Anything else, David?
Oh, sure. There's a couple more here. Have studies been conducted in any of the departments using Nuance technology? What was the outcome? Did they see increases in productivity? Were there any issues?
Yeah, so I think I can take that one. What we typically see, David, is there's a generally 2-week learning curve where people learn how to dictate. And we invest a lot in making sure that customers are successful with the technology. In fact, we have an entire organization, a customer success organization, that is involved post-sale to make sure that from the chief on down, there's support inside the organization for implementing speech recognition. And what we find, frankly, is yes. You can generally speak 3 times faster than you can type. And what we hear are a number of benefits. One is, the reporting process becomes much more fluid. Reports are captured in greater detail and specificity because being able to speak and dictate once you get the hang of it is extremely natural, and you tend to capture more and better detail. And we're even hearing things like prosecutors now are saying, geez, these police reports that are coming to us are really very detailed and really help build the case to help move criminal proceedings along. So it comes down to the documentation productivity. We actually do an analysis as part of our customer success program. of the ROI and the time saved. It obviously will vary by department somewhat in the processes, but there's a pretty dramatic improvement that you see. And I guess the other thing I would say is the safety factor that Rick spoke to is just huge. And, being able to do everything we can to help mitigate the risk of ambush or distracted driving, being heads up, situationally aware is one of the biggest things that we hear in terms of why it is that a chief would want to adopt this for their department.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here into a quick three-parter. How many departments are using this technology? Is such technology affordable for departments? And what is required to maintain it?
All right. Geez, I got to remember all three. All right. So
I can help you.
That's all right. So we're out today in the hundreds of departments in the United States. And that number is growing. To be perfectly candid, what you find is, particularly in a regional setting, when one department adopts the technology, you tend to see neighboring communities, neighboring states, all of a sudden, start adopting it as well. So we're in hundreds of departments used by thousands of law enforcement officers today. From a cost perspective, what I would tell you is that, obviously it's a license that we offer, and the more licenses that, the larger the department and the more licenses purchased, obviously you get into a discounting structure based on volume. But typically what we do is we really take a look, and we're really pretty insistent that to adopt this, taking a look at your current processes, because there tends to be not just the hard costs of things like, sending out a transcript to an outside agency to have an audio recording transcribed, but there's also overtime costs and administration and soft costs as well. I mean, how do you put a value on all of a sudden having much greater detail and specificity in your reports until you have a high-profile crime and you need that detail. So it's a combination of hard costs, soft costs, and we actively engage with our customers as part of the customer success program to define that, and to define that with real numbers that the department provides us with. And we're very confident, having been through numerous implementations, of our ability to save money and actually come up with a real ROI figure as well.
Okay.
Did I answer all three,
one more
David?
question?
Yeah, please.
Yes, it did. Yes. Is this type of technology utilized currently in patrol vehicles? Being a part of a small state agency, our offices are in our vehicles.
Yeah, in fact, that's kind of the bread and butter, if you will, David, because it's really capturing that report on the MDC using the RMS, where officers make the most use of it. We also, officers, investigators use it back at the station as well, but the primary use case, if you will, really comes down to this idea of being able to capture that report as quickly as possible while that incident is still fresh in the officer's mind. So absolutely, and in fact, it's probably the majority of cases is really installed. Any Windows-based MDC, for the most part, we will run on that, and officers make use of it from there.
Okay. Does Nuance provide pilot programs to departments interested in the technology? I come from a larger department, over 2,200 sworn members, and convincing the command staff to adopt new technology takes some work.
Yes, and not only do we offer it, we really strongly encourage it. One of the things that's important for us, I mentioned our customer success organization. The worst thing that can happen for us is to implement a technology, sell a bunch of licenses, and then not have the department actively adopt it and realize the benefits that they originally had discussed with us. So The answer to the question is yes, and what we ask in return from our customers is that they, in fact, assign a point person, and that there's a real structure to ensuring post-sale that we follow up. We make sure that officers are using the technology. If there are problems, we identify them. Literally to the point, particularly for larger agencies, we do quarterly business reviews, and those business reviews are with our customer success manager, as well as the executive sponsor from the police agency, ensuring that any issues that we run into, any roadblocks, that we resolve those. And frankly, we do that because at the end of the implementation, we want to be able to turn to the agency and say, you know what, just as we gave you a reference to speak to a peer, we want to be able for you to be a reference for us so that we can then speak to another agency and frankly, continue the proliferation of Dragon. So whoever it is that asked that question, please get in touch with us. We'll send our information out after the webinar, and we would love to chat with you about doing a pilot.
That's all the time we have for today, but for anyone who asked a question that wasn't answered, Nuance will be following up with you to help you with that question. We hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. I want to again thank Chief Richard Stanley and Nuance's Eric Lascola for today's presentation. I also want to mention that an on-demand version of this webinar will be available on the police website at policemag.com/webinars. Thank you, and have a great day.